Hi, everyone. We've talked a little bit about minor scales already, and we've talked about something called associated accidentals. But in classical music, especially, we can think of these associated accidentals as creating new types of minor scales. So if this is a minor scale as a type of scale, we have these little kind of subtypes, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be taking associated accidentals a bit further. So, we've talked briefly about associated accidentals already. Specifically, in a minor key, when we raise degrees 6 and 7. So, a question that often comes up is why would we do that? If we're thinking of starting from a major scale and then going to a parallel minor scale, we would be lowering 3, 6, and 7. So, why would we just lower 6 and 7 to raise them back up again? Like, why would we undo the work? There's a variety of reasons for this. So, historically, we modified these scales to give us greater tension and to reinforce the connections to major scales. So, just to keep a kind of, aural similarity between our major and our minor scales. In addition, in specifically common practice classical music in the Western art music tradition, from around 1750 to 1900, so the kind of bread and butter people like, Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart, especially for those composers, each scale degree, in major or in minor, has a unique purpose. And where, 1 is the most important note and 5 is the second most important note. And from there, all of our scale degrees 1 through 7 have a certain role to fulfill in music. So in order to keep this hierarchy intact in minor, we had to change notes in minor to sound more like their major equivalents, because this hierarchy derives from major specifically. So, in terms of naming these variations, like we don't need to just put our hands in the air and say, these are race scales because they are. Because we actually can't assign names to them. And there's going to be 3 types we'll be talking about today. We can think of these as different permutations of minor scales, and they each have their own names. We use these different versions of minor scales depending on different situations, and we'll talk a little bit about that. A lot of this is up to the composer's ingenuity and creativity and whatever they hear, whatever they want to make. But there are certain situations where you may want to use one scale over another. Think of these as flavors of minor. So the piece is still in X minor, say it's B minor, G minor, F sharp minor, whatever. But it's varied with these different versions kind of sprinkled in. So you could have a piece in B minor that has any of these 3 different combinations of minor types. So the scale we already know has a name, and it's natural minor. So all of the processes we've talked about to create a minor scale from a major scale give us what's called natural minor. So it's natural because once we've created it, we don't have to change anything. If we lower 3, 6, and 7 of a major scale, it's a natural minor scale. Natural minor scales also require no accidentals when working within a minor key signature. So if we are working within a minor key signature and have a minor scale, it's natural minor if you don't see any accidentals. It's just completely as is. So for an example, here's D minor. If we think of D major as having F sharp and C sharp, we've lowered F sharp and C sharp and lowered B to give us B flat. So this is natural minor, D natural minor. So we're going to be talking about pieces that kind of alter between these different types of minors, but there are rare instances where pieces are just in natural minor. So most music switches between, but rarely you'll see a piece that reinforces natural minor and doesn't add anything else. So we've already seen an example of this in the chorus of I'm Still Standing, the Elton John tune, where he switches from B flat major to B flat minor, and in B flat minor, it's natural minor. Another example that some of you may know is a famous jazz tune called Take 5. It's mostly in E flat natural minor. So there are these little chromatic moments, like all these accidentals here, that those are just embellishments. They're not changes to the scale. So if you omit those, this is all just in natural minor. You won't see raised 6s or 7s in a way that you would expect to see in a minor piece. So this is basically all reinforcing E flat natural minor. Let's take a listen to this. like I said, this is not the most common thing, and in classical music, it's almost completely unheard of, but it does happen actually a lot in rock. So some other examples include pieces like All on the Watchtower, Losing My Religion, or Money. So these are also pieces that are in minor and never raise that 6th or 7th in a way that we would expect to see. So speaking of 6 and 7, let's go ahead and talk about that. So if we raise just 7, we get a permutation that's called harmonic minor. So the scale is called this because it allows us to have a crucial harmony in Western art music, 5-1, hence harmonic minor. We haven't talked about chords yet, and we won't for a little while. So just as just to kind of give a very brief primer, having a major chord built on the 5th scale degree going to the 1 chord, whether it's major or minor, is a super crucial chord in the history of Western art music. So because of that, if we didn't raise up the 7th scale degree, your 5 chord would be minor. And for a variety of reasons, composers just didn't like that. So you do see minor 5 going to minor 1, for instance, in a lot of other pieces, like the examples I just showed on the previous page. But for the most part, we raise 7 to give us a new chord option. So this doesn't mean anything to us now, since we haven't really covered chords yet, but this is arguably the most important progression in Western music. And if we don't raise scale degree 7, we don't have it. So what that looks like is this. So we have D harmonic minor down here. We've got what we had before. We have B flat and now C sharp. So scale degree 7 is often called the leading tone. And by raising it back up, we retain the half step between scale degrees 7 and 1 we have in major. So remember the pattern is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. We now have added back in that half step, which is actually pretty crucial in terms of thinking about the hierarchy of our pitches. Something that I want to point out is because of harmonic minor, we can now see sharps and flats in the same scale. This is a rare example where you will see sharps and flats in the same scale. So be aware of that. That's actually normal. So what's called when we raise 6 and 7 is what's called melodic minor. So if harmonic minor gives us a chord that we need, then melodic minor gives us the tools for melodies that we need. For instance, the pattern of scales degrees 5, 6, 7, 1, as if we're ascending, is crucial in Western art music. And the way that these notes are in minor didn't satisfy composers historically. So in a sense, we're borrowing the notes from major to give minor more closure. So just like how we were talking about before, that hierarchy or borrowing chords, we're taking expectations we have of what melodies and chords should sound like from major and inserting them back into minor. For instance, that looks like this. We still have the lowered third, but now we've raised up 6 and 7. We have a B natural and a C natural. So melodic minor is often represented as raising 6 and 7 while ascending and lowering 6 and 7 while descending. But this isn't actually how music actually happens. So for pianists or people that have played music before, or people that have played the scales before, oftentimes melodic minor has this thing where it ascends with raise 6 and 7 and descends in natural minor. But that doesn't really happen in music in the wild. That's kind of all an invention. So we can just think of natural minor as being an ascending scale with raised 6 and raised 7. So let's tile this together and look at an example. So this piece here is in D minor, the key that we've been looking at throughout, and there's only 2 accidentals that are outside of our types of minor scales. Right here and right here. Every other accidental that you see is going to be related to one of our types of minor. So it's hard to find an example where there's absolutely nothing outside of one of these options. But this is actually pretty crystal clear in that it's mostly just the notes you'd expect in D minor. For instance, right here at the beginning, if we have D minor, we can see A, B, natural, C sharp, right? So this gives us the sense that this first passage is in melodic minor. If you see a passage without any accidentals, you're either in natural minor or the relative major. And this piece actually has both. This measure here very much looks like it's in the natural minor. We have D, we have F, we have A. We've got all the pitches that we would expect in a D minor area. And it's in natural minor. We've got B flats, we've got C naturals, and so on. This piece also then spends about 3 measures just playing around implying F. So notice we've got F here, F here, F here, Fs, Fs, and so on. It kind of switches the feel a bit from its minor tonic to the relative major, and then it goes back again once we get down here. And last but not least, we do have harmonic minor, where we've got B flats down here in the bass, but C sharps here in the middle part. So we do have kind of all of our different types of minor all in this one piece, including a change to the relative major. So we're going to listen to this. This is a Baroque piece of music by the composer Arcangelo Corelli. It's what's called a trio sonata. So it's written for strings. It's very beautiful. It's very slow. And you get to hear kind of all of these different minor inflections throughout. So as you can see, in a relatively short piece of music, we've got basically all the different possibilities of minor that we can expect. So I didn't include this in the main part of the class because the difference for a non-major is pretty subtle and not ultimately that important. But for those of you who are interested in being music majors, music minors, just musicians in general, knowing the different types of minor are pretty important. Especially because, you know, if you're going to look at any piece of music, particularly in a Western classical tradition, you're going to have to kind of know how to determine what all these accidentals mean, because there are a lot of them. So that's it. If you have any questions, just go ahead and shoot me an email.